It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and joining us to talk about miscarriage and a couple's journey through miscarriage is Laura Kelly Fanucci. Thanks for being here, Laura.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's so good to have you here. Your book is so important. Miscarriage affects so many couples. Many of our staff members here at the radio station, myself including, something that you've gone through. Can you share a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, so my husband and I lost our third child to miscarriage in the first trimester, and that was a really difficult experience. We'd been through infertility before we were able to have kids and kind of thought, okay, God, that was the hard part, right? Now we're able to have kids. This is going to be easy now. But the loss of that baby was really devastating and really, changed our marriage and our family. So we later actually lost twin daughters who were born prematurely and lived only a few days. So each of those experiences of loss in the midst of, raising 4 boys that we've now been blessed with has really kind of broken open our hearts to how important this is to help couples who are going through this. It's just so often a really hidden suffering. So all of that has really shaped our story as well.
Yeah, and whenever you say it changed your family, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think most people don't go into marriage or parenthood thinking that, real suffering is going to be part of it, right? We think if this is a calling that God's given us, to be married, to be parents, that, okay, we're ready, God, let's go. And I think it really has changed not only our view of, marriage and family, that really there always will be some kind of suffering that's at the heart of that. But I really think that actually each of the experiences of loss that we went through, it changed us as people too. I think, for better or for worse, we have our hard days, and it's difficult to understand how a loving God can let this happen. But I think it also, hopefully has made us more compassionate to how many people really suffer from this, and how we have a call as individuals and, as members of the church, as the body of Christ, to reach out to those who are suffering. So, yeah, I think it really changed us as individuals and our family as well.
And you mentioned those dealing with miscarriage often are struggling silently, kind of not sharing their struggles, and maybe even sometimes embarrassed by them. And I think with the best intentions, people try to minimize the gravity of this kind of a tragedy. Was that part of your experience, people trying to kind of sweep it under the rug and make it seem like it wasn't a big deal?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially because, our miscarriage was in the first trimester, like I wasn't showing yet, so when we would then turn around and share with people that we had gone through this experience and lost a baby, we heard the same kinds of things that so many couples hear, oh, well, it's probably better. There was probably something wrong with the baby, or you can try again, or, at least you can have kids. And I think especially when we believe like that baby was a child of God, like that was a human being with a soul and beloved by God and loved by us, and to minimize that life just because it didn't come to be in the same way that, we have been able to raise our living children. I think that, even the best meaning Catholics and Christians can sometimes say things that if we actually step back and think about it, we wouldn't say that to someone who has lost an 8-year-old or a 20-year-old, but somehow we minimize these early losses because we do want to encourage each other. I don't think it's a bad thing to want to encourage people, but I think, just to let people be sad and grieve and feel the fullness of the loss of this child that they were already, imagining spending the rest of their life with. I think that's really, really important.
Important, I can see. How can that be a good thing?
Oh, to encourage people to encourage each other?
Well, I think part of the reason we might try to gloss over some of these things is because we think the grieving process is a negative thing, and that by avoiding the grieving process, you're doing somebody a service or something like that. And so why is it a good thing to go through the grieving process?
Well, researchers have found that actually the more fully you enter into grief, the better you come out of it. So I think especially in generations past, I've heard so many stories of of people who had stillbirths, and the doctor would just whisk the baby away and not even let the mother see or hold her child. They just thought, oh, it'll just be too traumatic for you, just forget about it. You can try again. And I think that what we've actually learned is that it's more traumatic not to grieve it. I mean, to sit with the fullness of that loss, you really, when you face it in its fullness, you ultimately are able to incorporate that loss into your life and move forward. It's not something that people have shamed you, to bury away or, to just hide and move on. A lot of times, grief that isn't expressed or isn't, allowed to be experienced bubbles up much later in life. And I've had so many people reach out to me and say, I never really grieved the loss of that baby. And then when my parents died, I realized, I was dealing with a lot more than just their death. So sometimes that grief will bubble up at other points in our life. So I do think, as difficult as it is, I mean, we naturally want to avoid hard experiences and difficult emotions. But, the research on grief actually finds that the more we can allow ourselves to sit with it, ultimately, the more healing we'll probably experience.
And do men and women grieve differently?
Oh, definitely, I think. I think a lot of it has to do with how our society and our culture understands grief and understands, men and women. I think, of course, it's hard to stereotype because there are people who don't fit these examples, but overall, I'd say women tend to be a little more comfortable with their emotions, or at least our society thinks it's okay if women cry. I mean, that's not something that seems as shameful, whereas there's a little more hesitancy about men and tears and crying and grief. I mean, there's a sense of, we want men to be strong and stoic, and they too want to be, kind of the backbone of the family. And so I think the different ways that, even within a marriage, that a husband and a wife might be grieving differently, it doesn't mean that they both don't experience that loss and love that child. But, the wife might be more open with sharing how she's feeling and talking about it, or crying about it. And the husband doesn't necessarily express his grief in that way. My husband always tells me that it was usually in the car on the way to work that he could get angry, he could get sad and cry, and no one would see it. And I realized, wow, he doesn't have the same spaces or permission to grieve openly as I feel like I've been able to do as a woman. So I think, men and women really do tend to express their grief differently.
We're talking with Laura Kelly Fanucci, who, with her husband, Franco David Fanucci, wrote the book Grieving Together, A Couple's Journey Through Miscarriage. And I know the book is just chock full of suggestions and ideas and some of your personal experience as well. But what would be a couple of the suggestions that you would have for couples who have undergone a miscarriage?
Well, I think one of the most important things to realize is that it's very rare for couples to be on the same page with their grief. And so often when we've gone through something really devastating, one of the few things that can help is knowing that we're not alone in it, being able to at least share that experience with someone. But I think within a marriage, sometimes that can mean we expect our spouse to be feeling the same thing we are. Don't they understand how hard this is? Can you read my mind? I think the reminder that we really do have to give each other grace in those difficult moments and understand that, as I was saying, our spouse may be grieving differently from us, but that doesn't mean they're not grieving. So sometimes just understanding the difference, even, what each of you has gone through before. Have you been through an experience of grief before or not? There can be a lot that we bring to that loss that may be really different depending on what each of us has lived through. So I think being willing to make space for what your spouse needs, maybe your spouse is a real extrovert and needs to talk about it all the time. Or maybe they're an introvert and they just kind of need to crawl into bed and watch Netflix and not talk about it tonight. I think communicating about what we need, what we feel like we can actually do right now can be really helpful in trying to really strengthen your marriage through loss. And I think prayer is so essential, praying for your spouse, for their own grief, even as you're praying and trying to make sense of this loss and asking God all those big questions, to remember that we can pray for our spouses too and just ask that, God will be with them through whatever they're dealing with as well, can be really, really important to keep that at the heart of our marriage too.
And as far as family and friends go, prayer would be obviously applicable in that situation. But what are some other things that family and friends could do to support a couple that's gone through a miscarriage?
Well, I think first and foremost is to honor the loss of that child, not to try to just say, well, you can try again, or, kind of encourage them to move on, but to listen if they want to talk about it, to maybe ask if they named the baby and to remember that baby by name. I think it can be really easy now, thanks to these smartphones we all have, to set a reminder in your phone and just remember the day that they lost their baby and reach out to them each year on that anniversary can mean so much. It just takes a moment to send a text or an email, but it really can mean so much to the couple who's suffering. And I think, too, we often say when someone loses a loved one, I want to help. Let me know what you need. But the person who's grieving in that moment, they can't tell you what they need. They're just bewildered trying to make sense of everything they've gone through emotionally and physically. So I think making a really concrete offer of something as simple as, hey, I'm going to the grocery store. What can I get you? I know you need something. Or can I watch your kids for a couple hours so you two can go out and maybe just get some coffee and talk, or maybe you just want to take a nap, offering to shovel the snow or mow the lawn. Just making those concrete suggestions can be so much more helpful than just kind of leaving it open to them to come to you and let them know what they need. So I think really reaching out in love in those concrete ways can make such a big difference for people who are grieving.
Because honestly, we don't take people up on those offers whenever they're just generic and say, hey, if you need anything, let me know. Like, okay, thank you. I appreciate that. It's a nice gesture, but in reality, nothing ever happens. So yeah, giving a concrete example of, I want to do this for you. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'll let you do that. And one of the things that you said, like setting a reminder and sending somebody a text on the anniversary of the death, that again sounds almost counterintuitive of like people saying, oh, I don't want to remind them and bring this all back up again. But you're saying that would actually be a positive thing.
I think so. I mean, I always say you should take the lead from the person who's grieving, right? And if they tell you, gosh, I really, I don't want to think about it today, then no, you don't have to bring it up and talk about it. But I always say, you aren't reminding that person that they lost their baby. I mean, they've never forgotten. They could never forget. But what you are doing is reminding them that they aren't forgotten. And I mean, I've gone out into parishes and talked about this, and I'll have women come up and say, I lost my babies 50 years ago. I can tell you exactly how old they would be today. And I think, wow, we don't forget. There are some years when maybe that anniversary is a difficult day, and some years where it feels okay. It doesn't hit us, and it might not be logical how the date of that miscarriage strikes us. But I think, gosh, all the friends that have reached out, to us on those difficult days, just to see a little text and think, wow, somebody else is remembering my baby and me today too. They're praying for me. That means so much. So I think, we're a church that we celebrate each of these lives. We believe that God is with us in our hardest moments. And we're a deeply liturgical church. We always remember these feast days every year. And I think sometimes these small kind of anniversaries of the heart, I call them, those days that we'll never forget, just to know that someone else is with us on that day can make such a big difference.
Well, and like we mentioned at the beginning, the miscarriage is so common that there's so many couples that are dealing with this, and this book is going to be such a great resource. I know you've got suggestions on how to deal with things in the future, and then also things that parishes can do. You have an appendix for that. So a lot of great things that are in here. Where can people get a copy of the book?
Well, it's available from our Sunday visitors, so you can order it from their website or from Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Yeah, it's out everywhere now, so you can pretty much get that wherever you buy your books.
All right. Again, it is called Grieving Together, A Couple's Journey Through Miscarriage, and it's written by Laura Kelly Fanucci and her husband, Franco David Fanucci. Thank you so much, Laura, for joining us today, sharing this with us, and sharing some of your story. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.